All right, welcome back to the podcast, everyone. It is Rhiannon, and I'm really excited about this episode because we are talking about art craft, kitchen witchcraft, and all the different ways that you can become crafty in your witchcraft, beyond just pulling out a candle and slapping a spell together. You can do so many things within your craft. And I'm really excited to dive into this. I have a special guest with me today, Katrina, and they are a art witch and also a kitchen witch. And I believe you are professional in the ways of pattern making.
Yeah, I'm a knitwear designer. Yep.
Yeah, that's so amazing. So that's what you do that full time?
No, I wish. One day.
Oh, that'd be so cool though, right?
Yeah, it would definitely be cool.
But yeah, I would just like you to introduce yourself to the listeners and maybe a little bit about your practice and what makes it different as with normal magic practices apart from that.
Yeah, definitely. So my name is Katrina. My website is stitchandwitch.com, and I talk a lot on my own podcast and on YouTube about how we can use crafts and art in our spiritual practice and how they kind of meld together. I started on my pagan path when I was 15 years old, and somebody handed me a Silver Raven Wolf book, like so many of us millennials. And I moved from there to really in my late 20s and early 30s, really wanting to make my spiritual practice more of an everyday thing instead of a big to-do. I don't like set aside huge blocks of time for witchcraft, but it became part of my everyday, and my everyday is arts and crafts. So it kind of was a natural melding of the two.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, I wanted to talk to you a lot about your craft because it's something similar to what I do. I first started off in the Wiccan sphere of things like so many of us do, and then realized quickly that that didn't fit for me and moved very quickly into folklore and folk practices. And then I realized how many opportunities throughout our days that we have for the craft, and it's not always having to be this big to do. I mean, I love huge ritual and all that. It's wonderful a couple times a year, but I'm busy and I know everyone else is busy, and being able to just throw out an intention real quick and have it stick is so helpful, and it gets you to your goals so much faster, I think.
Yeah, it really does. I was going through a kind of a rough time spiritually, and I wasn't able to set aside blocks of time, which was part of it. Like it was a life pushed me that direction, you know? And so I started, that was like right around the time. I'm a pretty avid journaler and bullet journaler, and I have been since the first grade. So I started really tracking what I was doing every day versus what I wanted to be doing every day, and like figuring out what was actually taking up my time. And I realized that there are two steadies in my life. There are two things that I do absolutely every single day, and that is I knit and I read every day. Without fail, I find time for those two things because they are what I enjoy, so I prioritize them, right?
Yeah.
So then I started thinking like, well, if I'm knitting every day and I'm not meditating every day, I'm still kind of meditating every day, right? Knitting is meditation. So how can I make that more intentional?
That's a beautiful way to like really be mindful into what's important to you and be able to adjust to it. I've been going through that myself lately, and actually I just started my first bullet journal. I'm very
Oh
excited.
yes, I think I remember you mentioning that. That is really exciting.
Yeah, I can't wait to show everyone it. It's a work in progress, but I'm very excited about it because it's a hybrid of a couple of things. But yeah, I think it's really important to be mindful about what really works for you and try things out. Like, you know, in the practice, big spell work's not always going to work for everyone, and some people don't feel comfortable with it. Maybe it's too much of a big to do for them, and they're more of an introverted person, and they want to just be able to put their intention together, throw a quick sigil together, burn it, and get it on with. And I'm a big proponent for just finding something that works and sticking to it. So that's awesome.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah. So I was wondering, what does your everyday practice look like since you had to like really contemplate on it and really see what works for you. What have you found works?
So I have found that the easiest thing that works for me is letting go of what I thought I knew about witchcraft, letting go of what I thought I knew about the pagan path, and really going with what I wouldn't say it's so hard with pagan practices because it is so individual to each person, right? So I wouldn't say that this is like what everyone should be doing, but what worked for me was really going with what I instinctually felt was right. So I was reading one of the big name pagan books of herb associations, and this particular herb association, this author that wrote this book, I can't remember if it was sage or mint. It was an herb I use a lot, and I was reading it, and it was associated with masculinity, and it was associated with like war and self-defense and all these things that I was like, that this feels like such a peaceful, calming herb to me. I think it was mint. I think that was what it was. But I was like, this feels like such a peaceful, calming herb to me. That can't be right for me. Like maybe that was right for him, but that's not right for me, right? So incorporating my my crafting into my daily practice and into my spiritual practice has been a lot of really looking at what I'm instinctually feeling. So this weekend, for instance, my puppy was sick this weekend, and so I was very stressed out, and I didn't want to knit something that I'm going to see all the time, and I didn't want to knit something that I've already, you know, maybe been putting good intentions into, because I was not in the headspace to do that. So I started a whole new project, a hat in bright reds.
Oh, fabulous.
For somebody that I love, but not somebody that I see every day, so that I can kind of like, I can get rid of that stress into the item and then, you know, cleanse it and send it on to somebody who is going to love it. But I don't have to think in the future about the stress of this past weekend, right?
Oh,
And so that's a lot of what it's become, is like how these objects naturally tie into my life, and really being intentional about when I'm creating what.
that's such a great way to like look at things. I feel like I do want to dive more into doing more like sewing magic, and I'm looking into getting a sewing machine. I've already started like stitching sigils into my clothing for different purposes. And I found that really helped me a lot, especially at work, because I work in a dark cave, basically. And I need the energy to be a normal person. So I stitched that into my uniform, and I've seen a huge difference with it for sure.
Yeah. Have you seen Rachel Henderson's book So Witchy?
I have not.
Fantastic book, and she's wonderful. And she's now working on another one. She's got a couple of crafting books, but it's all about exactly that. Like it's incorporating magic directly into, especially sewing like that.
Oh, I like that. I definitely will have to put it onto my next book list. I still have two to read through, so I want to read more this year. I feel like I was talking to another witch creator that we have in our Discord, and she's already read like 16 books, and I was just like, how?
Okay, I read a lot, and I've read 5.
I know. I don't even know. It's been like 2 weeks. I don't know yet. I have to get her list, because I'm like, are these like zines? Are they larger books? Like, how fast do you read? Please teach me your ways.
I mean, I've read 5 books, and one of them was a graphic novel. So, like, how?
I don't know.
Yeah, So Witchy, SEW, So Witchy is the name of the book.
Oh, fab. Okay, I'm gonna add that into my stuff, because I want to start like sewing into like my junk journals and stuff like that too. Yeah. I was wondering, what's one of the like most important lessons you've learned through walking your current path that you've had, transitioning from life you had before into now?
I think probably in light of like how I really look at my creative path, I would say that it's actually was exactly that. But a lot of that lesson came actually from my spouse, who is Maliseet, which is a Wabanaki tribe. And I learned from them this concept, and I don't fully embrace the concept myself, but I learned from them the concept of not working on things that are gifts for others when you're feeling negative. I really had to work out how that works with my own personal spirituality, in that so much of my crafting is stress relief. So I'm going to be working on it when I'm negative. But learning that, or thinking about it in that way, in the way that this particular tribe thinks about it, really changed how I look at what I'm creating when, and really helped me determine how I'm feeding that energy into what I'm crafting.
Yeah, I love that for sure. Because like even when you're doing like a baneful working, like you're feeding that into the object, right? So if you're feeling negative, it's automatically going to start pouring into the item. But it's a great way for it to be a vessel into the earth, right? Pour it into an item, cleanse it, and then it's done with, and you don't have to worry about it seeping into different parts of your life that you don't want. That's a really beautiful concept. I love that. I'm also from an indigenous tribe, so I'm Cree.
Oh,
and
nice.
I love learning different concepts from different tribes and different communities, because I'm so far removed from what I was not raised in. So it's nice to be able to like, relate to something and then go and research it.
Yeah, it's really an eye-opening thing being associated with a tribe.
Yeah.
It's really very interesting.
Yeah, it's such a different way of life, and it's something I feel so called to like be able to like do one day. All I want to do is just literally, I think I say this almost every podcast, move into the forest, on the edge of the forest with a pack of dogs, and just stay there.
Yes, I mean, I'm almost there. I live in Maine, and basically the whole state's forest. So
Oh, fabulous. I wish. I'm like in the middle of a main city, and I'm just like surrounded by cement.
even, I mean, I live 1 mile from the state house here in Augusta, Maine, and so that's like the middle of the city. But in Maine, that doesn't really mean much, and I have a really big backyard and a lot of trees. So
Oh, nice. Yeah, that's really nice, because I have this small little patch of like area. I live in a condo, and I'm lucky to have a yard to begin with. But like I just have this small little area for a garden, and the rest is cement and a shed, and it's just like I just want to pull it all out and put grass in it. So I was wondering, what, if you have any, off the top of your head, what are some great resources that had helped you on your path to developing where you are now, that helped your crafting and your witchcraft path?
Yeah. I mean, my crafting path started at birth, basically. I kind of joke that the smell of a hot glue gun to me is the smell of Christmas, because my family is extremely crafty from like all the way down. I actually have this blanket, not that one, but that one behind me was made by my great grandmother for me when I was little. So I've had it since I was really small. And she was an avid knitter, and she had 13 children, and then a bunch of grandchildren, great grandchildren, and a great grandchild before she died. And she had crocheted or knit blankets for every single one of us.
Oh my gosh.
Like it's in my blood, right? Crafting is in my blood. It's always been there. But the resources that help me now, and that is really a lot of like sharing one-on-one with other crafters. However, that book So Witchy that I was talking about by Rachel Henderson is definitely at the top of my list of crafting resources with witchcraft. And then for me, a lot of the things that help me on that path are not necessarily the things that you would think of. The book Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer has absolutely changed the way I look at the world, the way I looked at my craft supplies. The book has absolutely nothing to do about crafting, but she is from a tribe that I cannot remember the name of, and she talks about like her spiritual relationship with nature, which really then kind of pushed me to look even more at where are my supplies coming from, who's making this yarn, is it being spun in some sort of like slave labor situation, what's going on here, right? How is it impacting the earth? So that book had a lot of influence on me in that direction. And then the third resource that I would say has been the most pivotal is probably the work of Corey and Lane at New World Witchery. They are folklorists, or Corey's a folklorist. Lane is about folklore here in America, historically and by location, and really thinking about how we approach the things like Sabbats and what we celebrate at certain times and those kind of things. They're looking at North America, which so much of pagan mythology comes from Greece and Ireland, and it comes from European countries, and but they're looking at North America, which really made me think about, like, I live in Maine. Why am I celebrating the harvest a month before we actually get or a month after we actually get a harvest here in Maine? Like, what, why am I celebrating the coming of spring in our month that has the most snow? Like, why am I putting up that, so it really made me question by location how my spirituality ties to where I am, and why it is that way.
Oh, fabulous. Yeah, I definitely encourage anyone listening to go out and check out that book. I know for me, I checked out the why is it escaping me at the moment?
It always does that in the moment you want it.
Year of the Witch by Temperance Alden. And it definitely like got me thinking. I was like, okay, like I started out with Wicca and I started celebrating their Sabbats, but like they really have nothing to do with what I practice now. Yeah, I find them a beautiful practice, and they're very similar to what I had already practiced. That's why it was so easy to continue. But I had to definitely reevaluate and start pulling from my different lineages. So I started pulling from my Cree background through my Irish and Scottish background. So I still celebrate some of like the original Sabbats, but they're by a different name and they have a different meaning behind them. And I relate to them so much more this way.
Yeah. Yeah. Creating your own wheel of the year essentially is something I've been thinking a lot about, and I have kind of made this year the year that I'm really going to put it to the test and figure out, like, because I always feel like the day of a Sabbath, suddenly a bunch of my friends start sending me like messages telling me, happy Samhain, and I'm like, well, Samhain's an easy one to remember because it's not Halloween, but like they're sending me messages of like happy whatever, and I'm like, oh, that's today, whoops. I nothing prepared. I didn't even think about it, because in my world maybe it's not quite the right timing for it, and then there's other days that I maybe will feel that. So in the same way that I a couple of years ago started looking at how I was spending my time and tracking my time, this year I'm really focusing on how I'm associating with the world around me, with nature. I've got a date set in late February to look over my seeds for the spring, and a date set in March for starting my seedlings. And those are the kind of things I'm looking at incorporating into my actual wheel of the year, as opposed to like a holiday somebody wrote in a book 100 years ago.
Yeah, definitely. Especially because like they were from two different like cultures kind of like mushed together, and then they made sense for who was practicing at the time, but if you're removed from even that practice, it doesn't really make too much sense, just because it's air quote the witches holidays. I feel like the witches practice is so individual, like it is with everyone. Even that kitchen witch in one part of the country is going to be different from the other, and their holiday is going to be different because of their experiences
of the planet. And I would have to like be putting in the economic resources myself, and somebody ships it, and there's oil costs, there's all these things coming into play, right? And how does it make sense for me as somebody who is creating a spiritual practice around my connection to a planet to then be damaging that planet by trying to seek out somebody else's spirituality, when in reality the herb that I made,
getting really into gardening, it took me sand and stuff, and I had to so I had to make all to the yard, and now it's finally workable. So now I want to be able to like throw in my own herb garden and be able to pull from it fresh, because I find for myself at least, when I'm doing something off the cuff, a fresh herb is like more powerful for me than something dried and that's been sitting on a shelf for a long time.
Right.
Yeah, so I'm so excited about like this summer because I can't wait to like dive in there.
Yeah, I'm actually planning on doing it. Haven't for a couple of years ago, and it came with a, and
Oh,
she's like, we don't want. And then there's also a family of possums that they haven't eaten before I could.
that issue, and they had to like put caging underneath
Yeah.
their earth, and then they also had to like put a chicken coop netting over top of it, and have like these opening cages, and it worked for them.
Intense though, intense.
Yeah, it's intense. But if you want to get some type of like profit from your garden, sometimes you just have to do it.
Yeah.
Okay. I was wondering, have you listened to anything that was inspiring to you lately, spiritual wise?
I listened to the audiobook of Thorn Mooney's new book. The name of the book is escaping me, but Thorn Mooney, everything she writes is great. So, but I listened to the audiobook a couple of months ago and found that super inspiring. I'm a big audiobook. I read and listen to audiobooks all day long. I'm always flipping between them or flipping between different books. So I'd say that would be something that really inspired me was just kind of it was nice to kind of get back at looking at the basics of spirituality and kind of reviewing those through that book was really cool.
Oh, fabulous. Okay, I'll have to check that out because I'm compiling a huge list for myself. So I'm hoping to do book reviews this year. So I'm
Nice.
a little selfish in that question.
That and Braiding Sweetgrass. I don't think anything in the last year has had more impact on my spiritual path than Braiding Sweetgrass has.
Oh, wow.
Such an amazing book. It's absolutely like, if there was a book everybody who's in a position of power should read, it's that one, but also the rest of us.
Oh, awesome. Okay, definitely that's going to be my top list then. It's always been something that I've looked at, and I was like, oh, I'm gonna get that book, but I always forget. So
it's so good. I was visiting my sister in March, and she got married, and I just grabbed it at a bookstore because I needed something for the airplane home because my phone charger had died, and I knew I was like, do I buy a book or a charger? I'm gonna buy a book. So I took a book with me on the airplane home, and I couldn't put it down. It was so good.
Oh, yay. Okay, makes me excited. On the same kind of like theme, do you have any practitioners or people that you look up to that have been the most influential in your practice?
That's a really good question and a very difficult one to answer. I have a lot of friends, especially in the pagan podcasting community from like 10 years ago or so when pagan podcasts really started to become a thing. I have a lot of friends in that circle that I really admire the things that they are doing within the pagan community. I find it hard in my own spiritual practice to look up to others, but instead to kind of look at them, right? And I think that a lot of the conversations I have with those people are really deep and fascinating. But I think it's a lot of that is a friendship. So I think it's about having like a network within the pagan community, a network of pagan friends that you trust and can talk to about things.
Yeah, for sure. Do you have any like famous witches that you really relate to, or
Not really.
no?
I could answer that question with fiction.
Yeah, sure. Why not fiction?
I think like so many. I think the Owens in Practical Magic, the Owens women have always been a big draw for me, especially in the last couple of books that she wrote with that family. So yeah, them definitely. There was another one I just thought of and then I lost it. Yep. Nope, it's gone.
That's okay. Yeah, I definitely relate to the Owens women. I feel like they have my entire like lifestyle that I want. So
yeah. Well, and it's all kitchen magic. Like even in the book, I've read the book a few times over now, and there's always a part that stands out to me where they're talking about somebody being so in love with somebody else that the butter melted in the butter dish. And like if that metaphor isn't kitchen magic, it's kitchen witch, right? That's what we're talking about. Loving somebody so much that your ingredients melt.
Yeah.
and like everything they do in those books and film, um, they're all kitchen witches.
They're all kitchen witches.
Midnight margaritas, kitchen witches.
Why not? I was actually listening to a podcast the other day. I think it was Witchology, and I had to look, I'll have to look up the name of the person, but they had a bartender witch on there who makes these special cocktails based on like the moon phases and for ritual. And it was like fascinating to me. I'm like, I want this book.
That's so cool. Yeah. See, there's so many. I mean, I think we associate kitchen witch with like a giant cauldron, and sometimes that's what it is, right? We had a couple of weeks ago. We had I babysit my niece once a week or a couple days a week, and she was here and she was grouchy, and my spouse was grouchy, and I was like, you know what? We're gonna make a big pot of happy soup, right? We're just gonna make a big pot of soup that's gonna make everybody feel better. And I roped the 3-year-old into helping me cook and everything. So that's like, sorry, my notifications are off and still my computer is dinging at me.
That's okay.
That's like, you know, how we envision a kitchen witch is through, you know, this giant pot of something brewing, right? But sometimes it's littler things. Sometimes it's just mixing a drink. Sometimes it's just taking a crust of bread out and offering it to the animals in the backyard. You know, sometimes it's something else, something smaller but no less important.
Definitely. I love that story. It's very sweet. I should try that next time my stepson's a little cranky. He gets really overstimulated with any type of technology. So if he's been in the house too much and not outside, he gets snippy. So I'll definitely have to try that. I actually watch The Green Witch. I'm not sure if you've seen her on YouTube.
Yes, I watch her.
Yeah. I tried her like puff pastries with like the lavender simple syrup. Oh my God. It was like the best sleep I've ever gotten.
Yeah, I saw her video about that. She has such aesthetic videos. Like I just want to stare at them. They're so beautiful.
Yeah, it's like my goal one day.
Sometimes I definitely strive for aesthetics in certain areas, and sometimes I just want to show the world something real.
Yeah.
Like the aesthetics are great, but they're just not real for me. Like,
that's okay. One day, maybe when I have a ton of money, I'll be able to afford a constant aesthetic, but I don't know. It's like a lot of work. What would you say is one of your favorite kitchen witch recipes that you've implemented into your practice besides the soup? Do you have like a go-to recipe that you do all the time?
I have two answers for that. So the first one is a simple simmer pot, which isn't a recipe you eat. But I have 2 different simmer pots that I set up regularly depending on what's going on. So one of them is like somebody's getting sick and it's got, you know, cloves and cinnamon and apple. And I have a list, like it's got certain things in it. And each one of them I associate with a certain meaning. And as I'm putting them into the pot, I'm thinking of that part to heal the person. The other one I have is my house needs a cleanse recipe, which to me, clean is all about citrus. Like there's just such a clean feeling and smell to a citrus fruit. So that one has some grapefruit extract and a couple slices of oranges and, you know, things that I associate with that. And that's how I cleanse my house. So the simmer pots are probably the thing I do the most often.
Really?
If not, that's my one I turn to quite often in different capacities. I have a little crock pot that sometimes is what I use for it. I have an actual pot on my stove that I sometimes use for it. But different things like that. And then my other recipe is my apple crisp recipe, which I have been making the same way since I was about 16 years old. I was just obsessed with perfecting apple crisp for a while there. It's my favorite, or one of my favorite desserts. And my mom saw my obsession and got me this like fancy apple peeler corer. and I still have that. So I have a whole protection spell that I do around that particular recipe. And whenever I make that recipe, I am protecting my family and friends and whoever I'm sharing it with, or just myself, because I might not be sharing it. And each of the herbs in my apple crisp recipe are associated with something.
Oh, fabulous. That sounds really good. I want to start baking more for intention this year. So that's a great idea to like put on the back burner for myself. So we only have a couple of minutes here, but I did want to touch on your spells that you put with all of the garments that you make, because that's like one of the more important things I wanted to touch on here. So want to explain a little bit about that and where they can find your items?
Yeah. So each of my knitwear patterns gets an associated spell, and it is in some way related to the pattern. Sometimes it's an actual spell that you would do while you were making the item. Sometimes it's just a spell that makes me think of that kind of same atmosphere that I'm trying to put off with that piece. So for instance, this is my Wayward Sisters shawl on my doll dummy behind me. What do they call it? Doll dress form, whatever it is.
Yes, farm, yeah.
Dress form. That's what it's called. So that is my Wayward Sisters shawl, and the Wayward Sisters, I'm talking about like the witches in Macbeth, right? Which in the 9th grade, me and my 2 best friends played the witches in my high school production, right? And we read them in class, and we were always like, that was us. We associated ourselves with them. So I wrote a spell around protecting your sisterhood, that it's separate from the shawl, but it's in the same, like if you purchase that shawl, you get the spell. Shawl pattern, you get the spell at the end. And yeah, it's just a whole different kind of spell, but one that I associated with that particular item.
Oh, awesome. I think it's so fabulous that you include spell work into the items that you make, into the patterns that you provide. And it just reminds me of like my family members who had like a giant sewing room, and they would sit there, but they would repeat like poems and stuff over what they were doing, and it always made you feel a certain way based on what poem they were using. And I don't think they knew what they were doing, but like whenever they made me like a special scarf or something, depending on the poem, I felt a certain way. So I think that's just really magical.
Yeah, I definitely think that that's magical. And I think a lot of it for me was, and I don't want it to sound like I just did it out of spite, but a lot of it for me was the realization that my Christian friends and family, they think nothing of throwing their religion into whatever public space we're in, right? If we're having a big dinner, they lead everybody in a prayer without question. And they don't even wonder about like, is somebody else here not Christian or whatever. And so for me, it became a lot of like, I felt like as a witch, I needed to put myself out there with that same energy and that same forwardness, because of I believe in the validity of my religious path.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, see, that's just like a completely other podcast I want to get into. Maybe we should have you back for something like that, because that's something I'm so passionate about.
Yeah, it's really big for me, like feeling comfortable enough in my path to, be okay with others knowing exactly who I am and what I am.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, same here. So do you want to like just give everyone a bit of where they can find you? I have about a minute and a half here. So
yeah, everything is at www.stitchandwitch.com. Absolutely everything. Links to my Etsy shop, my Ravelry, all of my knitting patterns, my random printables that I like to give away. That's just a thing I like right now. There's a 100-book reading challenge printable that you can just get on my website. All my social media is linked there. So everything, stitchandwitch.com.
fabulous. Thank you so much for joining me. And I cannot wait to release this podcast. So it's going to be fun. I feel like it could have been like a 2-hour one, because I'm just starting to get into it now.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And I will definitely come back and talk anytime you want.
Awesome. Yeah, I definitely want to get into that, the whole religious thing. So that'd be really fun.